The story started in a prison where the prisoners were having a slapping game. One of the participants was a big guy and everyone was sure that he would win. But then his opponent slapped him pretty hard, causing him to faint instantly. The opponent, a man named Zhang Shik, thought he had claimed the victor. But then a skinny and innocent-looking man from the crowd challenged him. Seeing the man who was skinny and weak, made everyone laugh, thinking he had no chance against Jungkook. But the skinny guy, a man named Jo Hunsu, ignored their laughter and was confident he would win. To decide who to start first, they played a rock-paper-scissors. Unfortunately, Yansu lost and had to take the first slap. Everyone was sure he would faint in the first turn, but surprisingly, he didn't even fall. It was finally his turn and he slapped Zhang Shuk so hard that he almost fell. Embarrassed by that, Zhang Shuk suddenly attacked Hyunwoo and a big commotion broke out. Then the prisoners began fighting each other. Hyansu, despite being a rather small guy, managed to fight everyone who tried to beat him. Soon the prison guards showed up and stopped him because if they didn't, he would have killed Young Shik. After the chaos, Hunsu was sent to the isolation cell where he first met a man named Han Jae. At that moment, he said that there were two kinds of people in prison, namely one he could socialize with and one nobody should ever have a beef with. He then asked which one Jae was, and Jae simply said that he was the one who made the rules there. Since that meeting, the two slowly formed a bond, as if they were fated to meet. The next day, Hunsu was told by his friend that nobody would dare to touch him anymore because everyone found out that Jo had become close to him. The friend then explained why Jo was so respected and feared by everyone. It was revealed that Jae was a trusted right-hand man of a big criminal organization. He made his way to the most feared figure in prison by beating everyone who stood in his path. Nobody ever beat him, and since then, no one dared to oppose him. However, one day, things changed when a new inmate named Kim Han arrived. Soon Han had an even greater reputation than Jo and everyone feared him even at the mention of his name. His arrival sent fear through the whole prison and this made Jo worried. The next day, Jo decided to make his move. He approached Sun Han and offered a collaboration for a cigarette business within the prison. But behind that, this was his way to get closer to Sun Han and to read his movements. Not only that, he also didn't want to cause any more trouble since his sentence was almost over. Unfortunately, Sun Han wasn't interested in his offer and just refused it. Right after that, a prisoner came and told Yo that his trusted right-hand man had been caught and beaten severely by the chief warden. Upon hearing that, Jae finally realized that something was fishy with Sun Han. It turned out that he was the chief warden's ally. Jo was so mad and vented it at the chief warden, but that only led to him being beaten and put in the isolation cell. 3 days later, Jo was released from the isolation and he looked very weak. At that moment, Zhang Shik showed up with a weapon in his hands with the intention to kill him. But fortunately, Hunu appeared out of nowhere and saved Jae. However, instead of thanking Hunu for saving his life, Jo was suspicious. He wondered why Hunu risked his life to save him. Young Soo just answered by saying that his mother had taught him to help people who were in trouble. This answer only confused Jo even more, but he also got an idea for revenge. Jae then asked Hunsu to come with him to the chief warden's office, saying that he wanted to report a smuggling activity within the prison. Shortly after, upon meeting the chief warden, Hunsu showed some evidence about the cigarette smuggling action that Jae had given him earlier. The evidence immediately angered the chief warden and he slapped Hunsu. But then Jo finally spoke. It was finally revealed that he had used the evidence to blackmail the chief warden. Since all the smuggling activity was under the chief warden's control, Jo used the evidence to make sure the chief warden allied with him and betrayed Sung Han. He revealed that he had sent the evidence to his men outside the prison and he threatened to reveal that crime to the public if the chief warden still bothered him. Cornered, the chief warden finally complied and he sided with Jo again. After that, Jo realized that Sun Ha's arrival in prison was on a mission and he suspected that he was the target. So he tortured Sun Han to make him spill the truth. But no matter how hard he beat the man, he could never make him talk. Fortunately, Zhang Shik, who turned out to be Sung Han's subordinate, admitted that they were there to kill Jo under the order of Byung Chul, who turned out to be Jaiho's boss. Upon hearing this, Jae was both shocked and mad. However, he forced himself to hold back to avoid raising any suspicion. Unbeknownst to everyone, it turned out that Hunu was not just an ordinary inmate, but an undercover cop. He was on a mission to get close to Jo to gain his trust so he could expose his entire criminal network within and outside the prison. He took this risky task after his superior, Detective Insik, promised that his terminally ill mother would receive a life-saving kidney transplant. Insik herself was a ruthless superior who would sacrifice others for the sake of a case. The day when a suitable kidney donor had been found, Hunu was beyond happy, unaware that this moment was the turning point in his life. On the other hand, the bond between him and Joe grew closer each day. One day, Byung-gub, Byung-cho's nephew, and Jae's colleague showed up. Despite his relationship with Byung-cho, Byung-gub had never liked him, especially after he beat him using an ashtray. Upon knowing that his uncle had betrayed Joe, he offered to help Joe take down the crime boss once he was released. However, Joe didn't immediately accept the offer. Since in this underworld, no one is truly anyone's ally. At the same time, Joe was also suspicious of Hyunwoo. He had asked Byung-gub to investigate the young man's background, but to no avail. On the other hand, Hyunwoo was so happy that his mother was about to be saved, but that happiness ended soon after. At that moment, his mother was having a call when suddenly she was seen lying lifeless on the road on her own blood. The news of his mother's death, of course, devastated Hyunwoo. He couldn't accept the fact that his mother had to die just when she finally had hope to be healthy again. On the other hand, Ju could only see what happened and felt the sadness in Hyunwoo's heart. That night, Hunsu called Ensik so he could be allowed to see his mother for one last time during her funeral, but Ensik refused him without the slightest hesitation, saying that he was not a good prisoner and it would be hard for her to make that request. Hyunwoo didn't give up and begged to be allowed to attend his mother's funeral, but Ensik seemed indifferent. This made him mad, and he threatened to reveal their mission if his request wasn't complied with. However, Ensik revealed her trump card. She threatened that if he dared to expose his mission, she would make him a real criminal and he would spend his life in prison. He couldn't believe that his own superior had the heart to do that to him. He had no choice but to comply. However, the very next day, the chief warden unexpectedly granted Hyunwoo a temporary release so he could attend his mother's funeral. He also handed him the address of his mother's funeral and informed him that Joe had covered all the expenses. Upon returning to the prison, Joe immediately went to see Hyunwoo. He knew that after what had happened to his mother, Hyunwoo desperately needed someone by his side. They had a long conversation and in that moment, Joe revealed his dark past, which shaped him into the man he was. He then told Hyun-soo to never put his faith in promises. Instead, he needed to learn to feel who was truly sincere toward him, and only then would he know who to trust. After that, Joe suddenly asked if Hyunwoo would be willing to become his subordinate after they were both released. Faced with that question, Hyunwoo stared at Jae-ho. He remembered how Insik refused to let him attend his mother's funeral and how Joe, the criminal that he was targeting, instead stood by his side. After thinking about it, he finally made up his mind. He confessed his real identity to Jae and his mission. Long story short, Jae was finally released. And after a while, Young-soo was also released. As he walked out of the prison gate, he saw Jae waiting to pick him up. Later that night, Jae brought Hyunwoo to a party and there for the first time, he met Byung-cho and Byung-gub. It was clear that Byung-gub didn't like Hunsu at all, and he provoked a fight. However, Byung-cho intervened and instead beat him in front of everyone before things got worse. Greater than the next day, Bunk summoned Byung-gub and instructed him to kill Jae-ho after their next massive transaction with a Russian mafia. He then revealed that this transaction required a special stamp to pass through a checkpoint. And unfortunately, that stamp belonged to a vicious man named Captain Choi. So, he still needed Joe to get that stamp. Music. Shortly after, Joe and Hyunwoo received the mission to retrieve the stamp and went to meet Captain Choi. At the same time, the police were also monitoring their every move because Hyunwoo was still connected to Insik through a tracking device. Upon meeting Captain Choi, Hyunwoo tried to purchase the stamp with a large sum of money. But as the man reached for the check, Hyunwoo stabbed his hand and a brawl immediately broke out. Applause. Meanwhile, Joe was waiting outside when he noticed more of Captain Choi's men showed up. He knew something had happened inside, and he quickly joined the fight. Music. At the same time, Hyunwoo was struggling against his opponents when more of the enemy arrived. Fortunately, Joe showed up and saved the day. Right when Young-soo was fighting a big man, they worked together to take the big man down. And fortunately, after a brutal fight, they finally managed to defeat their enemies. Soon after, Hyunwoo noticed something wrong with his watch, and soon, he realized that it was fitted with a bug. Without hesitation, he smashed that watch against Captain Choi, shattering it completely. This action gave him a window of time to avoid the police from sniffing around, because after leaving that place, their destination was a meeting place that the police shouldn't know. Shortly after, they finally arrived at their next destination. Joe told Hyunwoo to wait outside while he met the client alone, a clear sign that he still hadn't completely put his faith in Hyunwoo. While Joe went inside, Hyunwoo walked out by himself when suddenly someone pulled him and handed him another watch. But then just as they were chatting, Joe showed up. To avoid suspicion, Hyunwoo suddenly punched the man and made an excuse, saying that the toilet inside was smelly. So he decided to relieve himself outside. But then he was bothered by this man. Upon hearing this, Joe suddenly hit the man a few more times. So Hyunwoo had to drag him away to make him stop. Shortly after, Joe confronted Hyunwoo about the man earlier, because despite working together as a team, he was still weary about Hyunwoo. And moreover, he also knew that the man earlier was a police officer. Hyunwoo immediately explained that the officer only came to give him a new watch. After that, Joe apologized to Hyunwoo for suspecting him. He then took Hyun-soo somewhere, and upon arrival, he said that he had been betrayed by so many people in his life. Even someone he had trusted for decades had tried to backstab him, and that made him hard to trust anyone. Listening to this, Hyunwoo said that he wouldn't force Jae to believe him, but instead he would be the one who would believe in Jae. His word moved Jae. Long story short, 2 days before the big transaction, Bonggub had a meeting with Jae. At that moment, it was finally revealed that Byungub and Jae knew Hyun-soo less than greater than S true identity back when they were still in prison. But instead of killing Hyun-soo, they chose to use him. They hired someone to kill Hyun-soo less than greater than S mother. And after that, Joe would pretend to care to gain Hugh's trust. Their plan turned out to be a success. Hyunwoo believed Joe so much that he admitted his real identity to him. That same day, Hyunwoo was visiting his mother's grave when someone put a bag on his head and kidnapped him. They claimed that they were ordered by Jae-ho, but Hyun-soo refused to believe it. It turned out that this was nothing but a loyalty test done by INSIC. Fortunately, Hyun-soo managed to keep his mouth shut about his cooperation with Jae-ho. After that, Hyun-soo asked INSIC if she had found the person who murdered his mother. It turned out that behind all this, the police had actually found out about the murder and the perpetrator long ago, but decided to keep it a secret so as not to mess up with Hyunwoo's mission. It was revealed that it was Jae-ho who orchestrated the murder and used a cunning trick to manipulate Hyunwoo to work for him. But despite knowing all that, the police decided to keep it a secret so that it wouldn't mess up the mission. They even let Hyunwoo put his full trust in Jae so they could get more information about Jae. They simply sacrificed Hyunwoo for the sake of their mission. Later that day, Hyun-soo returned to Jae, but he decided not to say anything about his meeting with INSIC. On the other hand, seeing Hyu less than greater than S face covered in bruises, Jae asked what happened. But again, Hyunwoo refused to say anything. So, he dropped the subject. After that, the two went to the beach, and there they lit the fireworks and had a good time together. They looked genuinely happy playing together, and in that moment they stopped doubting one another and decided to trust each other. Finally, the day of the big transaction arrived. Before the transaction, Hyun-soo handed INSIC the information regarding the time, location, and parties involved. The chosen location for the deal turned out to be a cruise ship docked at the port. Later, as soon as both groups met, one of Jae's men suddenly realized that something was strange, and soon after, the police showed up before them. They had surrounded the location and were ready to arrest them. INSIC herself went to check the crates there to find evidence of the transaction, but to her surprise, he couldn't find anything there. She then proceeded to check another box, but again, there was nothing suspicious inside. She had no choice but to let the criminals walk away. Unbeknownst to her, the actual transaction point was somewhere else, and the organization had managed to secure its transaction. After the incident, although they had successfully tricked the cops, doubts were clear in the air. Despite that, they decided to just celebrate their success. But just as Byung-cho raised his glass for a toast, Jae suddenly said that he wouldn't drink with a corpse. Suddenly, he shot Bong-gil dead, and with that action, he finally took over all the power and control of the entire organization. Music. Meanwhile, INSIC realized that Hyunwoo had tricked her. So, she finally used her trump card. She asked Hyunwoo to meet, and upon meeting, she finally revealed everything about his mother's murder and about Joe, who pretended to care for him to use him as his tool. She also showed evidence to make Hyun-soo believe her. After discovering who his mother's killer was, Hyun-soo completely snapped. He demanded an explanation as to why the police had kept this a secret from him. Insik insisted that she was worried that their mission would fall apart if Hyunwoo found out the truth sooner. Despite anything Insik told him, Hyunwoo no longer cared about his mission anymore. There was only one thing on his mind, and it was to avenge his mother's death, and his only choice at that moment was to follow the instructions of the police so he could do that. Soon after, Hyunwoo called Ji-ho, pretending to give him information about a mole inside the organization. He asked if anyone besides Ji-ho knew his identity as a police officer in the organization. Ji-ho knew Byung-up also knew about Hyunwoo less than greater than S real identity, and that instantly put suspicion in him. Hyunwoo also informed Jo that the police would raid them the very next day to seize their goods, so they had to clear out immediately and run with the goods that very night. Hyunwoo then arranged to meet at a place Jae once showed him. Behind this, it turned out that the police were planning to force Jae to flee with the goods so they could capture him red-handed. Later that evening, Jae called Byung-up to his office to confront him about his betrayal. Byung-up tried his best to convince Jo that he wasn't betraying him. But no matter what he said, Jo had lost his trust in him. In that very moment, he was killed. Music, on the other hand, Hyunwoo headed to meet Jo while Insik and her team were monitoring not far from there. Soon after, Jo, who had done his business with Byung-up, showed up. Upon arrival, he immediately noticed that something was off. He knew that Young-soo had betrayed him, but he decided to play along. He then went inside the building and faced Hyunwoo. When they met, both finally came clean. Jo said that he had found out about the police, while Hyunwoo said that he had found out that Jo was the killer of his mother. Upon hearing that, Jo took a gun from his suit and pointed it at Hyunwoo. However, Hyunwoo wasn't afraid the slightest, saying that Jo wouldn't kill him because he still needed him to escape. Soon after, the police raided the building. But when they entered, they only found Hyun-soo alone. But then they were bombarded by bullets because it turned out that Jae was still there, hiding from the police. During the gunfight, one officer used Hyunwoo as bait to force Jae out, but Hyunwoo fought back. When Hyun-soo was cornered, Jo finally showed up and shot the police officer dead. In the end, only Jae-ho and Hyunwoo remained in the room. However, Jo still couldn't bring himself to shoot Hyunwoo, so he chose to leave. But as he was about to leave, a car driven by Insik hit him. Insik then came out of the car and was about to take him, but suddenly Hyunwoo appeared and immediately shot Insik in the head. He then killed Jo too by shooting him in the chest,